SteveHarvey invited a RoyalGuard to his show expecting just another light-hearted segment. But when the guard pulled out a photo of his fallen brother, it left him in tears. Want to know what really happened? First hit that subscribe button and comment below where you're watching from. Now without further ado, let's get into it. The studio lights brightened as SteveHarvey strode onto the stage of his popular talk show, his signature wide smile greeting the enthusiastic audience that erupted into applause. Today's episode featured a special theme, people with extraordinary jobs, and Steve had already interviewed a deep-sea diver who explored shipwrecks and a smoke jumper who parachuted into forest fires. Now, folks, we've heard some amazing stories. Today, Steve announced adjusting his suit jacket as he addressed the camera. But our final guest is someone truly special. He's traveled all the way from London, England to be with us today. Steve paused, building anticipation. Ladies and gentlemen, please, welcome to our stage a member of the Queen's Guard, Samuel Wilson. The audience's curiosity transformed into collective gasps and applause as Samuel Wilson entered the stage. His scarlet tunic gleamed under the studio lights, brass buttons polished to mirror shine. The famous bearskin cap added nearly 2 feet to his already impressive height, and his posture remained impeccable as he marched with precise measured steps to center stage. The effect was striking. Several audience members instinctively stood in respect while others reached for their phones to capture this unexpected sight. A military veteran in the third row raised his hand in an automatic salute before catching himself. Children pointed in wide-eyed wonder at the ceremonial uniform Most had, only seen in picture books or documentaries about London. My goodness, a woman in the front row whispered audibly. He looks like he stepped right out of Buckingham Palace. The precision of Samuel's movement created a momentary hush. His boots struck the floor with metronome-like rhythm, each step the exact same length as the one before. Unlike most guests who waved to the audience or played to the cameras, Samuel moved with singular purpose, his bearing transforming the talk show stage into something more formal, more significant. "Well, look at this," Steve exclaimed genuinely. "Impressed by the full ceremonial uniform, man, that is something else. Thank you for being here." Samuel gave a professional nod. "Thank you for having me, Mr. Harvey." "Now I gotta ask right away," Steve said with a playful glint in his eye. "Are you allowed to smile on my show, because I've seen you guys outside Buckingham Palace and y'all are always so serious?" He mimicked the famous stone-faced expression to audience laughter. Samuel's lips curved slightly. "I'm permitted to interact normally when not on ceremonial duty, sir." "That's a relief." Steve wiped imaginary sweat from his brow. "I don't want to be responsible for getting you caught marshaled or something." The audience chuckled, but Samuel's response carried a hint of something deeper. "The discipline is a matter of duty and tradition, Mr. Harvey. It represents something important to us." Steve caught that subtle shift in tone, his entertainer's instinct recognizing there was more beneath the surface. "I bet there is. And please call me Steve." He gestured toward the guest chair. "Why don't you have a seat if that fancy uniform allows it? So tell me, Samuel, what's a typical day like for you?" Steve asked as the audience quieted down, eager to hear about this unusual profession. "I wake up at 4:30 in the morning." Samuel began, his British accent adding authority to his words. "Preparation is extensive. The uniform you see requires approximately 3 hours to prepare properly each day." Steve's eyebrows shot up. 3 hours? You spend 3 hours getting dressed?" The audience laughed, but Samuel remained composed. "It's not merely getting dressed, sir. Each piece of the uniform must be immaculate. The brass buttons are polished until you can see your reflection. The bearskin cap is brushed to precise standards. The white belts are cleaned with a specific chalk compound. Our appearance represents centuries of tradition. And during your shifts, you just stand there." Steve asked, his expressive face showing both confusion and fascination. "We stand at attention." "Yes," Samuel confirmed, perfectly still regardless of weather, conditions, or distractions. "Have you ever had health problems from standing so long?" Steve inquired. "Guards have been known to faint, particularly in summer heat while wearing the full uniform," Samuel acknowledged. "But we're trained to fall at attention. forward like a tree to minimize injury. There are other challenges most people don't consider. Samuel continued after a moment. The bearskin cap alone weighs nearly 2 pounds. The rifle we carry is over 10. Our boots have metal-plated soles that conduct heat in summer and cold in winter. During a 2-hour summer shift, we might lose several pounds of water weight through perspiration. In winter, the winds that whip through the palace grounds can cause frostbite on exposed skin, yet remaining perfectly motionless is non-negotiable. Several audience members exchanged glances of newfound respect as Samuel added, "The record for standing still on Royal Guard duty is over 6 hours during a royal wedding ceremony. The guard in question required medical attention afterward but refused to abandon his post until properly relieved." "Fall at attention," Steve repeated incredulously. "You mean you're trained on how to faint properly?" The audience's laughter was tinged with amazement as Samuel nodded. "Discipline continues even in unconsciousness, sir. Now I've seen videos of tourists trying to make you guys laugh or react. Does that happen a lot? A hint of something?" Perhaps resignation flickered across Samuel's otherwise composed features daily. "Mr. Harvey, most tourists mean no harm, but they don't always understand what the uniform represents." "That doesn't seem right," Steve commented, his usual humor momentarily absent. "People disrespecting you while you're working." "Most visitors are respectful," Samuel clarified. "But many see only the ceremonial aspect and forget we're active duty soldiers." That caught Steve's attention. "So you're not just standing guard, you're actual military. Every guard is a fully operational soldier." "First ceremonial guard." Second, Samuel confirmed. "Many of us have served in combat zones before, or between ceremonial postings. I've served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq before my current posting." "What was that like?" Steve asked, his usual comedic timing giving way to genuine curiosity. Samuel considered the question carefully. "Different from what most people imagine," he finally replied. "The movies show constant action, but the reality is long periods of vigilance punctuated by moments of extreme intensity. My first tour, we patrolled the same 5 villages for 7 months. You get to know the locals, the landscape, the subtle signs that something isn't right. A normally busy marketplace suddenly empty. Children who usually play in certain areas absent. The wrong kind of silence." He paused, his eyes momentarily distant. "We built a school during my second tour, worked with local elders to establish security protocols, protected medical teams delivering vaccines. The combat operations made the news, but those quieter moments of connection and service, those were equally important parts of the mission." "And then you go from that to standing guard at the palace?" Steve asked, trying to comprehend the contrast. "The change can be challenging," Samuel acknowledged. "But the core remains the same. Duty, discipline, service to something larger than yourself. The uniform changes, but the commitment doesn't." As they prepared to break for commercial, Steve noticed something in Samuel's expression when he mentioned overseas service. A momentary distance in his eyes, quickly controlled but unmistakably present. When the show returned from commercial break, attentive viewers might have noticed a subtle shift in Steve's demeanor. His trademark smile remained, but his eyes carried a new seriousness. "Welcome back, folks," Steve said, his voice slightly more subdued than usual. "We're here with Samuel Wilson of the Queen's Guard." He turned to his guest. "Samuel, during the break you showed me something I think our audience should know about." Samuel nodded once. "If you think it's appropriate, Mr. Harvey." "I do," Steve said firmly. "Would you mind telling our audience about the photograph you carry?" The camera zoomed in as Samuel reached carefully into an inner pocket of his scarlet tunic. He withdrew a slightly worn photograph, handling it with reverence. Before holding it toward the camera, the image showed 2 young men in desert combat uniforms, arms around each other's shoulders, standing against a backdrop of mountains. "This is my younger brother Michael and me in Afghanistan," Samuel explained, his voice remaining measured. "It was taken during my second tour when our deployments overlapped for 3 months. You mentioned earlier that you served 3 tours in Afghanistan." Steve prompted gently. "Can you tell us a bit about that experience?" Samuel's posture remained Perfect, but his eyes took on a distant quality. My unit was primarily engaged in operations in Helmand Province, one of the more contested regions. That's dangerous territory, Steve commented. It was Samuel, acknowledged with characteristic understatement. We lost good people there. The discipline we demonstrate as Queen's Guards, Samuel continued after a moment. It isn't just for show. It's built on the same discipline that keeps soldiers alive, in combat zones. The ability to remain focused, controlled, and alert, despite distractions or discomfort. These are qualities that matter when lives are at stake. Your brother Steve said, carefully gesturing toward the photograph still in Samuel's hand. He was also in Afghanistan, yes, Royal Marines. He served 4 tours between 2010 and 2014. Something in Samuel's use of past tense made the audience grow even quieter, an intuitive recognition that the story was heading somewhere difficult. Michael was killed in action 3 years ago, Samuel stated, his voice today, but with an undercurrent of carefully controlled emotion. His unit was conducting a patrol near a village in Helmand Province when they encountered an improvised explosive device. He was 26 years old. Steve shook his head slowly, genuine sorrow evident in his expression. I'm so sorry for your loss, Samuel. Thank you, sir. Were you still deployed when it happened? Steve asked carefully. I was back in London by then, serving with the Guard, Samuel replied. I received the news while standing post at Buckingham Palace. My commanding officer came to relieve me personally. That's when I knew something was wrong. They never interrupt a guard's duty, except in the most serious circumstances. The audience remained utterly still. Many listeners visibly moved. A woman in the front row wiped away tears. Samuel paused, searching for the right words. He was the kind of person who could find humor in the darkest situations, always smiling, always lifting the spirits of his unit even during the worst deployments. His commanding officers said he had a gift for diffusing tension. When situations grew tense with local villagers, Michael would somehow bridge the gap, often through simple gestures or shared laughter. The Afghan children in the villages we protected would run to meet him when our patrol arrived. They called him the candy soldier because he always carried sweets in his pockets against regulations. A ghost of a smile touched Samuel's face. His commanders overlooked that particular breach of protocol. They recognized that those small connections he built saved more lives than any combat operation. And how did Michael handle those long hours between missions? Steve prompted gently. For the first time, a genuine smile touched Samuel's lips. That's actually why I agreed to come on your show today. Mr. Harvey, Steve's eyebrows raised in surprise. Michael was an enormous fan of yours, Samuel revealed, absolutely devoted to your comedy and your shows. A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the audience as Steve's expression shifted from solemn, toast, honest. My brother managed to acquire DVD collections of your original stand-up routines and your television programs. He would organize viewing sessions in the barracks during downtime between patrols, called it Harvey therapy. Steve placed a hand over his heart, visibly moved. They had a specific ritual. Samuel continued, his formal demeanor warming slightly with the memory. After particularly difficult patrols, Michael would announce Harvey time in the barracks. Word would spread and soldiers would gather, dragging chairs and cushions into their common area. They'd project your shows onto a white sheet hung on the wall. Someone always managed to find snacks, protein bars, care package cookies, whatever was available. Samuel's eyes took on a distant quality, seeing not the studio, but those barracks rooms thousands of miles away. Michael said it became something sacred, almost, this ritual of shared laughter in a place where laughter was scarce. Their commanding officer initially opposed it, said it was frivolous. Then one night, after they'd lost 2 men from a neighboring unit to an IED, he walked past and heard the laughter. The next morning, he told Michael to continue the viewings. Said he hadn't heard his men sound human in weeks. In his letters home, Michael would describe how entire squads would gather around a laptop to watch your shows. Men and women who had seen the worst humanity has to offer would sit together and laugh until they cried. Your humor crossed national boundaries. British soldiers, American Marines, Canadian forces, they all found common ground in those moments. Steve listened intently, his usually animated face still with the weight of this unexpected connection. He would quote your jokes during patrols. Samuel added the corners of his mouth lifting slightly again. His squadmates said it kept them sane during the worst times. When tension was high and danger was present, Michael would drop one of your punchlines, and somehow it would cut through the fear. I had no idea, Steve said softly, shaking his head in wonder. Michael always said he wanted to attend a taping of your show when he returned home. Samuel said he had it all planned out. He'd save up, bring our mother a proper holiday of it, the unspoken reality, hung in the airplanes, interrupted forever by war dreams that would never be realized. With deliberate movements, Samuel reached into his tunic again and withdrew an envelope. It showed signs of careful preservation, despite obvious wear-creased edges, slight discoloration from handling. This was the last letter Michael sent home. Samuel explained, it arrived 3 days after we received notification of his death. A collective intake of breath swept through the audience. Even the most experienced production staff exchanged glances, recognizing they were witnessing an extraordinary television moment. Samuel carefully unfolded the letter, the paper making a soft sound in the hushed studio. When he spoke again, his voice remained measured but took on a softer quality. Not quite his brother's voice, but a subtle shift that suggested deep familiarity with the words "Dear Family." Samuel began reading. We had another rough week here, can't go into details of course, but morale was low after what happened on Tuesday's patrol. I organized another SteveHarvey night in the barracks. Samuel glanced up at Steve, whose eyes had widened slightly. You should have seen it. Samuel continued reading. 2 soldiers crammed into our small common area. Everyone exhausted, everyone carrying the weight of what we'd seen. Within 10 minutes of starting the show, the whole room was laughing. By the end, even Captain Phillips was wiping away tears. The good kind for once. Steve swallowed visibly as Samuel read on. There's something powerful about laughing together after seeing the things we've seen. It's like each laugh pushes back the darkness a little. SteveHarvey probably has no idea his comedy reaches all the way to these mountains or what it means to us out here. But for those 30 minutes, we weren't soldiers in a war zone. We were just people sharing something human, though. The letter trembled slightly in Samuel's hands. The only visible sign of emotion he displayed during the entire interview. Tell Mom. I'm still saving up to take her to see his show when I get home. Some days thinking about that trip is what keeps me going. Some days that man's humor is the only thing that reminds us there's still joy in the world. Samuel carefully refolded the letter, the studio so quiet that the sound of the paper seemed unnaturally loud. He looked up at Steve, whose eyes shone with unshed tears. Michael wrote that 2 days before his final patrol, Samuel said softly, when we received this letter, his personal effects had already been shipped home. Among them was a small notebook where he'd been keeping track of how much he'd saved for the trip to your show. He had nearly enough. Steve pressed his lips together, visibly struggling to maintain composure. I wanted you to know that your work reached places you might never have imagined, that in one of the darkest, most dangerous corners of the world your humor brought light, and that my brother carried your words with him until the end. When I stand at my post, Samuel continued his restraint, making the emotional weight of his words even more powerful. I often think of Michael, of all the soldiers who never came home. Each hour of discomfort, the heat, the cold, the tourists trying to provoke a reaction, a dedicate to them. The stillness we maintain isn't just about following rules, it's about demonstrating that some things are more important than personal comfort or momentary impulses. That duty, honor, and respect still matter in a world increasingly focused on instant gratification. I carry Michael with me during every guard duty, Samuel said. When the summer heat is unbearable beneath this bare skin cap, I think of him patrolling in full combat gear under the Afghan sun. When winter winds cut through Buckingham Palace courtyard, I remember him describing them mountain cold in his letters home. Samuel touched his tunic pocket, where the photograph and letter were carefully stored, and when I hear his voice in my memories, it's often reciting one of your jokes. Mr. Harvey often telling me that laughter is sometimes the bravest response to darkness. SteveHarvey, the consummate professional, The man who had conducted thousands of interviews suddenly found himself overwhelmed. His eyes filled and a single tear traced down his cheek as he listened to Samuel's words. "Your comedy reached places you never knew." Samuel continued softly. "It provided moments of normally and profoundly abnormal circumstances. For soldiers like Michael, those moments were precious beyond measure." Steve tried to speak, but his voice caught. He cleared his throat, tried again, and found himself unable to continue as more tears followed the first. The studio grew completely still. Even the camera operators, professionals accustomed to capturing emotional moments, seemed affected by the raw authenticity unfolding before them. A production assistant quietly stepped forward to offer Steve a glass of water. He accepted with a small nod of thanks, taking a moment to collect himself. The audience, rather than growing uncomfortable with the silence, seemed to understand its significance. They witnessed a man known for helping others process emotion through humor, now navigating his own unexpected feelings. Of the cameraman later remarked that in 15 years of filming the show, he'd never seen SteveHarvey at a loss for words. The host, who had guided countless guests through their emotional revelations, was experiencing a profound one of his own. For several moments, Steve sat silently, an unusual sight. For viewers accustomed to his quick wit and energetic presence, the camera caught the contrast between Samuel's disciplined bearing and Steve's open emotion. Two different forms of strength meeting in an unexpected connection. When Steve finally spoke, his voice was lower, more measured than his usual animated delivery, carrying a depth that his regular viewers had rarely heard. "You know," he began, dabbing his eyes before tucking the handkerchief away. "As entertainers, we send our work out into the world, never fully knowing where it lands or who it touches." He shook his head slightly, still visibly moved. "In 30 years of comedy, I've heard many stories about how laughter helped people through tough times, illness, loss, hardship, but never did I imagine my jokes reaching soldiers in combat zones, giving them moments of joy between patrols." Steve leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I am profoundly humbled by what you've shared today, Samuel. Truly humbled. Your brother Michael." Steve continued, his voice growing stronger. "Sounds like the kind of man who understood what I've always believed about humor, that it's not just about jokes, it's about connection, about reminding us of our shared humanity, especially when circumstances try to strip that humanity away." Steve gestured towards Samuel's uniform. "I have to confess something. When me producers told me we were having a Queen's Guard on the show, I thought it would be a light segment. Maybe some jokes about staying still, about the big fluffy hats." He smiled ruefully. "I had no idea I'd be sitting here learning about courage, brotherhood, and the true meaning of discipline. What strikes me most about what you've shared," Steve continued, "is how your brother found ways to maintain joy, even in the darkest circumstances. That's a rare quality. And while I'm deeply touched that my comedy played some small role in that, the real credit belongs to him, to his spirit, to his understanding that laughter isn't frivolous, it's essential." Samuel Wilson rose to his feet, with fluid military precision, standing at attention before Steve and the studio audience. The scarlet of his tunic seemed more vibrant now, the brass buttons and medals catching the studio lights, not as mere decoration, but as symbols of service and sacrifice. "Permission to make a final statement, Mr. Harvey?" he asked formally. Steve nodded, his expression solemn. "Of course, in the military we have a saying, 'We stand so others may sleep peacefully,'" he began. "It applies not just to combat operations, but to everything we do. The ceremonial duties at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, the Tower of London, these are not just for tourists' photographs. They represent an unbroken line of service stretching back centuries. When we stand motionless for hours, we're not just following orders or maintaining tradition. We're demonstrating that some values transcend personal comfort: duty, honor, discipline, respect. In a world increasingly focused on instant gratification and individual expression, these qualities may seem outdated to some, but they remain the foundation upon which civilization rests." Samuel reached into his tunic once more and withdrew a small object. "With your permission, sir, I'd like to present you with something." He stepped forward and extended his hand, revealing a military patch, worn and faded but carefully preserved. The emblem showed a dagger against a backdrop of wings with the Latin phrase per mare, per terram, by CB Land embroidered beneath. This was Michael's Royal Marines unit. Patch, Samuel explained, his gloved fingers touching the frayed edges with care. It's from 40. Commando, one of the most decorated units in British military history. Michael carried this through 4 tours of duty. He went with him to Helmand Province, to the mountains of Kayaki, through firefights and sandstorms and nights so cold the water in their canteens froze solid. Samuel's voice remained steady as he continued. This patch was on his uniform the day he saved 3 Afghan children during a firefight, earning him the Military Cross for Valor. It was there when he carried a wounded American soldier 2 miles to safety under enemy fire. In our family tradition, we share these only with people who held special meaning in the life of those we've lost. People who in some way helped carry them through their darkest moments. Steve stood accepting the patch with evident emotion. I don't know what to say. He looked at the patch in his hands, then back at Samuel. I am deeply honored in presenting this to you. Samuel said formally, we welcome you as part of our extended family. Michael may never have met you in person, but your words walked alongside him through the darkest places. In our tradition, that makes you a brother in arms. The audience, sensing the significance of the moment, rose spontaneously to their feet. The applause began softly, then built to fill the studio. Not the usual enthusiastic clamor of a talk show audience, but something more measured, more respectful, with a precision that spoke of years of military service. Samuel executed a perfect salute to Steve. Not the ceremonial palace salute, but the genuine acknowledgement of respect between men who understood service in their own ways. As our story of SteveHarvey and RoyalGuard, Samuel Wilson, comes to a close, we're reminded that beneath every uniform, behind every public persona, lie depths of experience and humanity we might never fully comprehend. What began as a talk show segment about an unusual profession became a powerful lesson in looking beyond appearances to see the true meaning of service. If you found this story moving, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel. Press that bell icon to be notified when we post new content about the extraordinary stories behind seemingly ordinary duties. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder about the power of respect and the value of service. And as you go about your day, we invite you to reflect on these questions. Has entertainment or comedy ever helped you through a difficult time in your life? What does the dedication shown by Royal Guards teach us about honoring those we've lost? Check out the related stories appearing on your screen right now. And as always, we'll see you again tomorrow at the same time with another brand new Royal Guard story you won't want to miss.